The best conversations don't give you answers, they challenge how you think. I'm your host, Stephanie Chung, and as a keynote speaker and the author of Ally Leadership, I get a rare kind of access to the real conversations with the people worth listening to. And this show is me bringing that access to you. So pull up a chair and let's dive into our next conversation with someone not like me. Welcome back to Not Like Me. I hope y'all enjoyed that conversation with me and Dr. Brad as much as I enjoyed it because he is amazing. First of all, I love Dr. Brad. And if you didn't catch that the first time, let me be really clear. This man walks the walk, talks the talk. I admire him on so many levels. He has been a true ally for me and supportive of the work that I'm doing. And I cannot wait for y'all to be exposed to him and to really do even more deep dives into the work that he's doing, because men being allies to women in the workplace, we all need to be allies to everybody in the workplace, but certainly let's just start with that one, right? And so Dr. Brad's the real deal. I'm so glad you guys got some exposure to him. And so now I want to dive into what did we all take away from the conversation and whatnot, because hopefully you took a lot of notes. I know I did, and I hope that it blessed you as much as it blessed me. So let's talk about it. One of the things that I really noticed about, the conversation when it was done, he dropped a lot of nuggets. And I think the part that I really enjoyed the most is that we talked about the challenges that men sometimes have. And let's be honest, a lot of times when it comes to, allyship, we are quick to talk about people just need to be allies. And it's true. I mean, we need to just get there. But we can't act like there isn't a cost that comes with it. And so what I really appreciate about the conversation with Brad is that he was open about it. Here's what the cost is. Men lose their bro code. They may feel like, guys are going to make fun of me if I go and stand up for women and all the different things. And so whether we agree, disagree, or want to judge it or not is almost a moot point. The reality is that we have to be mindful of the fact that our guy allies, they are going to have to take some bullets as well, if you will. Now, I'm not feeling sorry for them, because the truth of the matter is, listen, all of us take bullets, and that's just kind of how we are. We should be built different, right? Because if we're leaders, we should be built different. We should be able to take a couple blows here and there, because that's what makes us different. And if we want real change to happen, change takes time, change is hard, but in order to grow, you must change. And so I loved everything about what Dr. Brad was talking about, which is really challenging men to, we're going to address the fact that it might be hard for you to stand up, and you might be the lonely only standing up for the women, in the meeting or what have you, but you can do it. Another thing that I took away from what he was talking about was I loved how much he can back up his stuff with research, because the research is important. The one that really surprised me so much was when we were talking about how when men are engaged with their children, how it changes their neuroplasticity into their brain. And so essentially their brain grows and develops a different way, at a higher way. And I think that's amazing. Like, if, who doesn't want to just be smarter and wiser and to truly be, creating new neural pathways in our brains, because we're continually growing and evolving. And so by having research that says that men who literally, support women in other ways, which is being more active, if you're a dad, being more active in the household, so your wife's not carrying the full load, and that blesses the child statistically, that certainly will help, your partner, your wife, but it also helps you. I mean, again, who doesn't want to have their brain working at maximum capacity and actually growing and functioning correctly? So that was a takeaway that I really enjoyed as well. I'd love to have you guys, hit me up in the comments or hit me up on social and tell me what you got out of it as well, because again, he was dropping nuggets. It was unbelievable. So, a lot of times people may ask, is this just a conversation? I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. We're having a lot of conversation. And truth be told, I think a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, I'm almost tired of all the conversations, right? We've been talking about, let's just take the pay gap. We've literally been talking about the pay gap for well over 20 years, and yet we've not closed the gap. If anything, research shows we actually went backwards this year. Women are still making 80 cents on the dollar for every man. And so we have to keep having conversations, yes, but this isn't a conversation. It's not, it should just be like, we're going to all talk about it and then get all, either feel good or get pissed, right? We got to do more than that. So it goes beyond a conversation. It really is. I'm calling out leaders. If you want something to change, you have to be the change because you're the one that has the power and the authority to make the change. And so this can't continually just be a conversation. It really has to be leaders, and it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, leaders saying, you know what, this is how things are going to operate for my company. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to put forward, and then execute on everything you just said so we can stop talking about it and we can start being about it. So that's one of the things I love with what Brad and his business partner, Dr. Dave, are doing, is because they're trying to not to take it from a conversation, put it more towards leadership and responsibility, and then also accountability, which I thought was really cool. Oftentimes I wonder, why do leaders miss this moment? Like, what is so hard about this? Since when is it a bad thing to include everybody? Like, we literally learned this in kindergarten, right? Like, if you didn't learn this in kindergarten, then, well, that could explain some stuff. We all learned this in kindergarten. Somewhere along the line, we've lost the way on that. One of the things I think about when I think about the conversation with Dr. Brad is, has this happened to me, is what I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking. And even at my level, as much as I preach this stuff and I eat, sleep, and drink it, it has happened to me. It continues to happen to me. I'm no exception out there. I remember when I first started out in my career, and I was working for the airlines at the time. And so I was working as a gate agent, and my supervisor was a man. And I'll never, ever forget this. This was probably one of those moments as a young, woman in my career that it stayed with me so much that I knew that if I got into a position that I could make a significant change, this was the thing I always go back to because it still bothers me 40 years later. Okay. So I was working at the airport. We had it was a busy Thanksgiving weekend. We all have probably traveled during Thanksgiving. It can be an absolute nightmare. And this was no exception. And I remember the plane had a female captain. And it was Boston. It was freezing out that day. And so she'd gone in and she did something with putting the heat on or something with the plane, kind of getting it ready. Whatever she did caused the windshield to crack. He didn't have, the ability to replace it. And so basically the flight was going to be canceled. Now, you don't want a canceled flight during Thanksgiving because you can't move. You can't get those people. Everything was booked solid. There was no way we were going to get people back to make it to Thanksgiving dinner. And, that one canceled flight now was it threw off the whole gate because now we got to rebook 125 people and tell them you're not going wherever you thought you were going for Thanksgiving. So it was a horrible situation. And so now me and my boss are going back up the ramp because we've got to get ready to announce it to the customers and rebook. And as we're going up there, I never forget, he said to me, he goes, you know what, Steph? And that's why you women belong in the kitchen. And I will never forget that. Because he was so mad because he's like, she just screwed up, this female captain. And so he was just livid. I mean, he was so mad. Now, I understand being mad because I too have to rebook all these people and get ready to get screamed at for the next couple of hours, right? I understood it. But I'll never forget when he said that. And he said it just in passing as he's kind of shooting past me real quick to get up back to be able to get to the gate area. But think about that. That, as far as he was concerned, that flight was canceled, the windshield was broke and all that stuff because she was a woman and she really should have been in the kitchen. So, have I been around it? Has it happened? Yeah, I'm in a male-dominated space. I could probably spend weeks giving you examples of how I've heard it, seen it, been a part of it, or it, being directed at me or what have you. But here's the thing. If you're criticizing a woman to a woman, it's directed at all of us, right? And so, we've got those courageous moments that we have to discover and figure out what are we going to do. And I never forget that. And it's really interesting. Maybe that's part of my passion, why I'm so focused on making sure that we have a much more inclusive industry, because that kind of ignorance, there's no room for it, right? I say that because sometimes people may think, oh, well, she's up there, speaking about this stuff, so clearly it doesn't happen to her anymore. Oh, no. That was 40 years ago. I can tell you something that just happened to me, 2 weeks ago, where I had somebody trying to mansplain something to me, and he was nowhere qualified to do it. Didn't stop him from trying, though. But, so it does happen to all of us. My point, though, is what I've learned, and I'm still not very good at it, but I've gotten better at it. When it happens, you want to flare up and kind of, run across the table and choke them out. And so I know I can't do that. And so what I've learned to do is just kind of take a beat, breathe, and then address it the right way. And that addressing could be asking questions so that I can set it up to be able to give them a different point of view. Sometimes if I've got a great relationship, I can just call them out on it and be like, well, are you smoking crack? Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've heard you say today, right? So it just depends on the relationship I have. But I know we're all dealing with it, but you can't give up, and certainly you can't quit. And if you're a guy out there and you want to be an ally to women, or you have daughters or, wives or anything like that, then it's helpful when you say something as well, because that way it gives us one less fight we got to fight. I remember another time in my career where I had a man be an amazing ally for me, and I'm so grateful for him and every other ally. But this was the same time, probably 30, 40 years ago, when I was working at the airport. A lot happened to me when I was working at that Boston airport. It seems like it was one of my funnest jobs, I will say. And so I remember we had a flight, and this flight was going from Boston to Atlantic City. And we used to call that the drunk flight, because so many people would be on the plane. Like, they'd show up, and they were going to get hammered because they were going to Atlantic City. But we can't let somebody visibly drunk get on a plane, right? And so I remember we're boarding the flight. We did last call to get everybody on. We closed the doors, and then this gentleman who was clearly drunk had come over, and he's kind of staggering over, and he wants to get on the flight. Well, one, we've already closed the door. Two, he's so drunk we wouldn't have let him on anyway. And so I remember saying to him, the flight's closed, happy to rebook you. And, and so I'm trying to go through the process, and he's just yelling and screaming, and that's not working for him. And so one of my colleagues who sees all this, she leaves her gate. She comes over to help with my gate. So now the two of us are trying to tag team this guy. He's just belligerent. He's screaming. He's cussing. And she happened to be Black, and I happen to be Black. So he then starts with all the slurs, right? And so in the meantime, the airport, the people around the surrounding gates are kind of watching, and it's getting louder and it's escalating. And, we're trying to keep this guy calm. And it's just, he's not having it. He's flinging stuff and screaming, and just it's not a good scene. And all the people that were sitting around there, you could feel like they were just so nervous and uncomfortable. And then I remember my boss, his name, shout out to you, Gary. So Gary comes over, and he doesn't know everything that's gone on. He just walked onto the scene. Gary comes and he sees the guy, clearly frustrated. And so he says, he can see my face. He can see my colleague's face. And he's like, to the gentleman, he says, can I help you with something? And the guy's like, yeah. And he said, these two, and he used the N-word, won't let me on this flight. And Gary, my boss, he doesn't know everything that's led up to this. And he looks at the guy, and the guy gives him his ticket. You can help me. Like, Gary's going to help him because, they got that bro code thing going on. Gary takes the ticket, and he literally rips it in probably 500 pieces as he's losing his shit, by the way, right? And Gary's like, how dare you say that? How dare you talk to my people like that? These women don't deserve that. They're amazing. And he goes on and on and on, right? And then Gary takes his ticket that he has ripped up in front of this guy, throws it at him, and says, we don't want your type on our aircraft. Now get out of here before I call security. And he's just huffing and puffing, and he's bright red at this point. The guy goes staggering off. Gary's still mad. And I remember me and Marie are like, Gary, like, okay, appreciate the support, dude. Are you good? Right? Because he had just completely lost his mind. But that's allyship, okay? Like, I don't know that we need to go to that extreme, because we were trying to calm the situation. But that was Gary. And he was sincere, and that's who he was. And he was our leader, and he was not going to allow that to happen on his watch at all. And that's the kind of boss that he always was. He's very consistent with that. That's the kind of boss everybody wants to know they have a boss who's going to back them up if when the road gets rough or if something crazy happens. Gary was a great example for me on what allyship actually looks like. He didn't talk about it. He was handling his business that day. But that's an example of, like, again, you don't have to go to those extremes, but make sure that your people know that you will and you are a person who's going to defend them at all costs. Here's what's really interesting about that story. And again, one of those things I still remember. I loved the allyship of Gary. It was amazing. And yeah, sometimes, you know what? Sometimes allyship, we talk about being polished and professional as much as we can, but Gary wasn't at that day. And there are times that you do, it's okay if you're going to you're losing it, right? Because I don't know that that drunk guy would have been able to hear a calm conversation. We were trying to have a calm conversation with him before Gary got there. Maybe Gary's response was exactly what the gentleman needed. But here's what's really interesting, because of talking about responses. There were so many people in the boarding area from all different types of gates that were nearby. Everybody was hearing it. When Gary ripped up the guy's tickets, threw it in his face, and told him, "We don't want your kind here, now get out," he got a standing ovation. Everybody that was around in the area was like clapping for Gary, like, woohoo, and supporting us as well. They weren't just clapping for Gary. But here's my point. At no point did anybody that was in the area come and do anything. And there's a lesson all in that, because they all felt uncomfortable. They all were watching this thing unravel and unfold. And yes, some people may say, well, they didn't really work there. What were they supposed to do? Well, you could do something. You could do something. And you got two women dealing with this drunk, belligerent guy. Certainly there's opportunities to do something. They all chose to do nothing. And so when Gary did something, obviously, their feelings came out and they were like, oh my God, thank God, this is great. He's doing the right thing. Somebody should protect these ladies from this kind of verbal abuse, but they chose to do nothing. And so I guess my question to those of you listening is, be thinking about the times that you have the ability to have a courageous moment. Do you take it? Or do you just talk about it? I'm a fan of, like, don't tell me, show me, right? I don't want to hear all your stuff. Just show me. And that, not only did Gary show me, but the people that were all sitting around doing nothing, they showed me too. They just showed me something different. So a lot of times people may ask, and I have guys ask me this all the time, what does it actually look like to be an ally to women? The truth of the matter is, don't overcomplicate it, right? If you see something, say something. I don't want people to feel like I've got to take a 6-week course to figure out how to be an ally. You instinctively know how, like, if something's wrong, you feel it. A normal functioning human being, you're going to feel that this isn't right. And the differentiator between ally and just people who talk a good game is the fact that they actually will take that feeling and do something with it. That's all it is. So to answer any of my guys who have been, asking that question, who have asked that or at least thought about it, how you do it is when you see a woman being interrupted, you stop and say, you know what, actually, I really love that idea that Stephanie just had. It sounds like you're trying to elaborate on it. Is that right, Frank? You know what I mean? Right? Do something, say something. And I thought Dr. Brad had some great ideas, by the way. I think the one that resonated the most with me is you may, after the meeting, go to the woman and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I keep hearing you're trying to give some great ideas and people keep cutting you off. How can I partner with you at the next meeting so that I can actually help support you better when you're giving those ideas, because people need to hear them, right? So there's just different ways, guys, that you can do the little things that will mean a lot to her or whoever you're being an ally to. It's really not that complicated. I think that sometimes we overthink it and we think about it so much that we get exhausted because we feel like, oh my gosh, I've been, I don't want to keep hearing about this ally stuff. Well, until things change, you're going to keep hearing about it. And just the fact that we're talking about it doesn't mean things are changing. And so if things don't change, then we got to keep, doing what we got to do. So anyways, guys, don't overcomplicate it. You know instinctively what to do. If somebody was being abusive to your wife, you would do something. In this case, it's a woman, it's not your wife, it's somebody in the workplace, but, do something, say something, whether it's in public or if you've got to pull the person aside. Whatever. It's not that hard, but don't overcomplicate it. And even though we're talking about men and women, the truth is allyship is allyship, right? We all are called to be allies or can be allies. And so I don't want you just to limit it. Brad and I were talking specifically men and women in the workplace, but you can be an ally to anybody, anytime. It doesn't have to just be men or women. Women can be allies to men as well, right? Or allies to someone who is perhaps neurodiverse or, whatever. So we all have an opportunity in this big old world we live in. I promise you every day you have opportunities to be an ally to someone. And when we think about ally, right? Obviously, I've written a book, Ally Leadership, but just as a reminder, ally stands for ask, listen, learn, you take action. That's what it is. It's an acronym. I could have called the book Allyship, right? Which means something different. I didn't. I was purposely thinking, no, what I need people to do, especially if you're a leader, is I just need you to ask. And then I need you to listen. And if you ask and you truly listen, you're by default going to learn. And then when you learn, and at that point, you now have a decision make. You're either going to do something with what you learned or you're not. If you choose to do something, you are taking action. That's what ally means. Real quick, before you move on with the episode, something I see a lot of strong leaders is that they really care. They work hard and still they lose trust without knowing where exactly it went. My Ally Leadership Framework gives you a practical system for leading people who are not like you so that you stop missing the signals that are quietly costing you more than the trust of your team. I built it from my own real life experience, not from a research paper. So if you feel that gap in your leadership, I want you to go to stephaniechung.com/ally to learn more. All right, leader, let's get back to the episode. I actually have an example of something this is going to be such an odd conversation, but I'm going to share it with you because it's just us. I remember when I was selling jets or in the private jet industry, I had a very diverse team because I'd worked really hard. The team I inherited was not very diverse. And then over time, I was able to bring in more women, bring in more diversity of thought, how people saw things, communication styles, so on and so forth. And I remember one day, I used to always say to the team, you are your brothers and sisters' keeper. So even though we're a team, I expect you guys to always look out for each other, protect each other. We all win or we all lose. And so I really instilled that into the team. And I never forget, I get a call from one of the team members who happened to be a guy. And he said, so I just want to give you a heads up. The new person, she's here. And we're kind of noticing that the way that she's dressed is not conducive for when you walk on board an aircraft. And what it's doing is, it's putting her not in a good light because certain customers are like, whoo, right? Because when you walk up a jet, you're kind of bending over and you're going up. And so if you've got a short skirt on, people are seeing stuff that you didn't anticipate. Well, she was new. This was her first time showing jets. And so she didn't realize all that. And so one of the guys that called is like, as like her team, we try to protect her, but we don't really know what to say because they're guys, right? Which I understand. So they're like, we just wanted to give you that heads up so that you're aware so that, maybe you can address it because we don't want her to be put in a position that, could be somewhat unsafe for her. No problem. Now, here's the thing. I appreciated that call. This was somebody that there are times that you want to be an ally, but it may not be appropriate for you to say something. So then say it to somebody else who can say something. One of the things that I want to make sure that you have some real tools to walk away with, Dr. Brad gave amazing insight. And, one of the things that I do, and I always encourage other people to do this, is when you're being interrupted, let's just use an example. If you're a woman and you're being interrupted in a meeting, what you don't want to do is not say anything. Unfortunately, what happens is if you don't have the tools, then a lot of times people will just kind of shrink and be interrupted and then say nothing. Or they let the person interrupt them, which then sidetracks them off of what they were saying. And now all of a sudden, they end up in Never Never Land. And it doesn't really look good because they are now talking off subject, right? One of the things that I have done in my career when people interrupt me is so let's say I'm talking to someone and they, abruptly interrupt me to take me off track. What I always do is I stop and then I'll say, I understand your question. I will answer your question as soon as I'm finished talking. Let me finish my thought. and then I finish, whatever it is I'm talking about. So that way I'm acknowledging them that they have a question. I'm not completely blowing them off, but I'm also not letting them derail this conversation because I've got a certain thought process that I'm trying to convey. And I'm also in the middle of this meeting kind of getting 10 toes down so everybody knows, right? I'm marking my territory, if you will. So that's one way that I've done it. I do it even when I'm still being interrupted now, right? I will do it all the time. It's an easy way to do it. You can either do it with a smile, so it's a little bit, less assertive, or if you really do want assertive, you don't do it with the smile, right? So you can play around with it depending on the moment. But that's one way. It's an easy way, is just to tell people, I hear you. And as soon as I'm finished, I will answer that question. So you're always still in control of what it is that you're trying to convey. Listen, leadership these days is really, really hard. You're trying to, lead a very, very modernized team, which has different generations, different genders, different races, different sexual orientation, different neurodiversities, different abilities. I mean, it's a lot. That's just the people part of it. On top of it, you're still trying to deal with tariffs and wars and uncertainty, and people love the product. People hate the product, right? Gas prices. I mean, you're dealing with a whole lot of stuff in business. You have the pressure of getting the result, and yet you're still trying to lead all these different people who don't think alike, don't communicate alike, don't have the same lived experience. Leadership is tough. So what I would say to those of you in leadership now is cut yourself a break. It's hard. Like, it is tough out in these streets when it comes to leadership, y'all. So I get it. So what I would just tell you is don't beat yourself up. You don't have to be the perfect leader because that person doesn't exist. What you do have to do is just make sure that you're aware. And so if you're aware, at least if you're aware, you have a fighting chance to change the behavior. If you're not aware, then that's going to be a challenge for you, because if you're not aware, you're not going to grow and go up in your career. People are just done with the nonsense. You must have some basic, human connection skills. People are not as interested if you just being super duper smart and you can't relate to anybody or communicate with anybody. Those days are dead. We expect you to be smart, sure, but we'll take over the smartness, the intellectual part. We will take over you having emotional intelligence over you being intellectually intelligent. We can grab the next person who's intelligent. What we're looking for is the whole picture. So yes, have your smarts, that's important, but also make sure that you understand human connection, human factors, empathy, communication, listening, right? Ask more questions. What I would tell you as a new leader, or any leaders, worth their salt, the better you get at asking questions, the better you'll be in listening, right? You don't want to ask a question, not listen. Better you'll be at being a leader who people notice and people want to work for. And those are the people who get promoted over and over and over again. So do that. Let that be part of your goal. One thing I would suggest that you do this week to make an impact is I want you to do the ally portion of ally. I want you to ask. Don't ask a question that you already know the answer to. Don't do that. Don't ask the question in hopes that they hurry up and say something so you can start talking again, right? But really, really ask the question. And once you ask, I want you to listen. And it sounds easy enough, but can I tell you, less than 2% of our country is actually formally trained in listening? So listening is an art. It's watching the body language. It's listening to the tone. It's listening to what they're saying. How are they fluctuating their voice? It's literally using all your senses. When I say listen, people call it actively listen, but you've got to learn how to really listen so you don't just hear the words someone's saying, but you hear the essence of what they're actually saying. Sometimes, remember, the words that are most powerful are the words not spoken. So you got to be zoned in on people's body language and their nuances. And, they may say one thing, but their body language says something else. So that's all a part of listening. So ask, listen, you will learn. If you do those two steps right, the first and second, you're going to by default learn. And then what I would just encourage you to do is, based on what you learn, don't let it go to waste. Execute, do something. You take action with what you learned. And more importantly, the other thing I want you to get into a habit of doing is thanking people. If you ask someone for advice, thank them for giving it to you. If you learn something new from somebody, tell them thank you. You know what? I never thought about that viewpoint. That's a different perspective. Man, I appreciate that. Thank you. Right? Thank you goes a long way. So find somebody today or this week at your job that you can sincerely tell them thank you because of some kind of impact they've had. It doesn't have to be something big, grandiose. It could be something small. But get into the habit of thanking people. It goes a really long way and it's free. We're making a movement, y'all, where everybody is asking and listening and learning and taking action. So I want to be the first to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. Now go spread it, right? So everybody be a part of Ally. So thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Not Like Me. Listen, if this conversation made you think, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a colleague or send it to a friend or a loved one. Bring someone else into the conversation because growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we learn from others, even when they're not like you. I'm Stephanie Chung, and I look forward to seeing you next time.